The morning sun streamed through the high windows of Windsor Castle, painting long, elegant rectangles across the ancient stone floor. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood perfectly still as her tailor made one final, almost invisible adjustment to the hem of a dazzling ivory gown. The dress was a masterpiece, intended for Royal Ascot, an event synonymous with summer, spectacle, and the very heartbeat of the royal calendar. For weeks, the public anticipation had been building. Fashion commentators speculated on the color of her hat, the drape of her silhouette. Yet, as the fabric rustled softly around her, Catherine felt a profound disconnect. The reflection in the mirror showed the poised future queen, but the woman inside was navigating a far more private and uncertain landscape. A familiar, gnawing fatigue, deeper than the ordinary tiredness from her relentless schedule, had settled in her bones. A persistent, unsettling sensation that she had initially attributed to stress and overwork now refused to be ignored. She had pushed through discomfort before. It was an unspoken part of her duty, but this felt different. This time, the thought of smiling through the long, glittering afternoon at Ascot, of maintaining the flawless facade under the world's gaze, felt like a mountain too steep to climb. The decision, when it came, was not a dramatic moment, but a quiet, steadfast realization in the calm of her private apartments. She would have to step back. This withdrawal would not be a mere diary change. It would be a statement, sending ripples of concern and speculation across the globe. The world would ask why. The answer was a journey. She was only just beginning to understand herself, a path leading away from the grandstands and into the silent, brave territory of her own health. The process of informing the institutions was a lesson in measured protocol. A private meeting was held with the king. Charles, with his own recent health struggles casting a new light on mortality and vulnerability, listened with immediate empathy. There was no pressure, no reminder of duty's heavy weight, only a father-in-law's concern and a monarch's understanding. Plans were quietly, efficiently recalibrated. The announcement, when released by the palace, was a model of careful wording. The Princess of Wales has taken the decision to withdraw from attending Royal Ascot this year. Her Royal Highness is grateful for the understanding of the royal family and the public as she prioritizes her recovery from a planned abdominal surgery earlier this year and, more recently, a course of preventative chemotherapy. The phrase preventative chemotherapy landed with a thud in the public consciousness. It was a medical term that spoke of a battle fought behind closed doors, of a prognosis that demanded proactive, aggressive defense. The news wires buzzed. Social media flooded with messages of support, but also with a torrent of questions. Preventative from what? How is she really? The polished image of the serene princess was suddenly and powerfully humanized by this admission of a fragile body. In the wake of the announcement, the bubble of Adelaide Cottage became both a sanctuary and a command center. William, determined to be her steadfast anchor, cleared his diary where possible. Their home was not a hospital ward, but a place of intentional normalcy. There were still the joyful, chaotic school runs with George, Charlotte, and Louis, the sound of their laughter a potent medicine. But woven into the ordinary fabric of family life were the unordinary rhythms of recovery. Days were structured around rest, gentle walks in the private gardens of Windsor Home Park, and the demanding cycle of treatment. Catherine learned to read her body's new language. The days of crushing fatigue that followed a treatment session, the manageable nausea held at bay by medication, the precious windows of strength where she could engage in a puzzle with the children or discuss a charitable report. Her medical team, a small, trusted circle, visited discreetly. Their updates were cautiously optimistic, focusing on the positive response to the preventative regimen. But the path was long, and the destination uncertain. William watched her with a mixture of awe and anguish. He saw the effort it took for her to appear bright for the children, the way she would save her energy for a small family picnic on the grounds. Their conversations deepened in the quiet evenings, veering from practical plans for the children's summer holidays to hushed, raw exchanges about fear, hope, and a future they had always assumed was guaranteed. Publicly, the narrative was one of respectful distance. The palace, learning from past media frenzies, maintained a firm but graceful boundary. A new, trusted communications secretary, brought in to manage this sensitive chapter, worked closely with Catherine and William. Their strategy was one of controlled transparency. Occasional updates will be given, but on their terms. The insatiable hunger for a photograph, for a glimpse of her, was deliberately left unfed. This silence, however, became a canvas on which the public and press projected their own stories. Well-meaning but intrusive headlines speculated on her appearance, her weight, her brave smile in grainy long-lens photos. The very absence of imagery became a story in itself. Meanwhile, in her private world, Catherine discovered unexpected reserves. Her love for photography, once a hobby to share glimpses of her family, turned inward. She started a private journal, not just of words, but of images, a dewdrop on a spiderweb outside her window, the soft focus of her children's hands planting seedlings, the quiet gradient of a sunset over the trees. These were not pictures for public consumption. They were a visual diary of finding beauty in stillness, a practice in mindfulness that her medical team encouraged. The woman who had always been defined by her engagement with the world was now on a profound journey of engagement with herself, learning the difficult lesson that to heal, she had to truly withdraw. The first major test of this new, fragile equilibrium came not from a public event, but from a private milestone, William's birthday. The couple decided on a small, private dinner at home. Catherine, determined to mark the day, used one of her good afternoons to walk slowly through the kitchen with her chef, suggesting his favorite dishes. She rested the entire morning to preserve her strength. That evening, she dressed not in a designer gown, but in a comfortable, elegant cashmere sweater and trousers. The dinner was a quiet triumph. The candles flickered, the children presented homemade cards, and, for a few hours, the shadow of illness receded. It was a powerful reminder of what she was fighting for. Not a return to the balcony or the gala, but to these ordinary, precious moments of connection. Later, as she lay in bed, the fatigue washing over her like a warm tide, she felt not defeated, but quietly resolved. The withdrawal from Ascot was not an end, but a necessary pause. It was the closing of a public chapter to fiercely protect the private, ongoing story of her healing. The world waited for news, but inside the walls of her home, a different kind of progress was being measured. In small victories, in managed symptoms, in the growing strength of a spirit learning to navigate a path it never expected to walk. The summer at Windsor unfolded with a peculiar duality. Beyond the ancient walls, the world continued its frenetic pace. Headlines shifted to elections and sporting events, while the social season glittered on without its most photographed attendee. Inside the carefully guarded privacy of Adelaide Cottage and the surrounding parkland, time moved to a different, more deliberate rhythm. Catherine's world had contracted, but in that contraction, she found a new kind of depth. Her recovery was not a linear march toward wellness. It was a daily negotiation with an invisible adversary. Some mornings, she woke with a clarity and energy that felt like a return to her old self, filling her with a buoyant hope. She would use those hours wisely, reviewing correspondence from her charitable foundations, focusing on her early childhood development project, which continued to be a source of deep purpose. She found she could contribute in new ways through thoughtful memos and video calls where her insight, rather than her physical presence, was the gift. On other days, the aftermath of treatment laid her low. The fatigue was not mere tiredness. It was a heavy, leaden feeling that made the simple act of reading a book to Prince Louis an immense effort. She learned the hard discipline of listening to her body, of surrendering to the rest it demanded without guilt. William became the chief architect of this new normal. His role evolved from prince and husband to protector, scheduler, and gentle enforcer of boundaries. He managed the delicate dance of shielding her from external pressures while ensuring she remained connected to the parts of her work that fueled her spirit. He saw the frustration in her eyes on the difficult days, the frustration of a woman used to running marathons now learning to walk again. Their partnership deepened in this crucible. Conversations that might have been about public engagements were now about blood counts and nutrition plans. He learned to distinguish the slight flush in her cheeks that signaled a fever from the healthy glow of a good day. Their love, so often portrayed in grand ceremonial terms, was now expressed in the mundane and profound. Him bringing her a cup of ginger tea without being asked, her squeezing his hand tightly during a moment of fear after a call from the doctor. The children, shielded with exquisite care, were nonetheless perceptive. "Is Mummy's poorly better today?" Lewis would ask, his small face earnest. Catherine and William had settled on a simple, honest script. Mummy had a poorly that needed special medicine, which sometimes made her very tired, but the doctors were helping her get better. The focus was always on the positive action, the moving forward. The absence from the public stage, however, created a vacuum, and nature, along with the media, abhors a vacuum. The palace's strategy of dignified silence was a double-edged sword. While it granted Catherine the peace she desperately needed, it also allowed speculative narratives to sprout in the darkness. A grainy photograph taken from half a mile away, showing Catherine walking slowly in the garden with William, was splashed across a tabloid with ominous headlines about her frail appearance. Another source claimed she was suffering from a specific condition, each guess more outlandish than the last. The new communications secretary worked tirelessly, pushing back firmly on falsehoods while reiterating the request for privacy. It was a constant, low-grade battle. Catherine herself was largely insulated from the daily churn of gossip, but William felt its sting acutely. He confided in a close friend about the anger he felt at the intrusion, at the reduction of his wife's courageous battle to a crude guessing game. This period hardened his resolve about the kind of monarchy he wished to lead, one that could be open about human frailty without being stripped bare by speculation. Amidst this, Catherine discovered an unexpected ally in her father-in-law, the king. Charles, who had faced his own very public cancer treatment, began to call regularly. Their conversations were not just about health, though they shared notes on the peculiar side effects of treatment and the importance of patience. They spoke of history, of art, of the quiet resilience of nature. Charles, often perceived as formal and distant, revealed a wry, empathetic humor to his daughter-in-law. He sent her books from his library, and, on one occasion, a small, exquisite watercolor of the Scottish Highlands he had painted himself. It was a gesture that moved her deeply. In him, she saw a blueprint for navigating illness within the golden cage of royalty, a way to be vulnerable yet steadfast, to accept limitation without surrendering to it. This shared experience built a bridge between them that years of official functions never could. Meanwhile, Catherine's own parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, became pillars of practical support. They were a tangible link to the life before royalty, a source of unconditional, non-ceremonial love. Carol would often visit, not as a guest, but as a mother, taking over the kitchen to prepare Catherine's favorite comforting meals, or simply sitting with her in the garden, talking of nothing and everything. As the Ascot meeting came and went, replaced by Wimbledon and the beginnings of the summer holidays, a subtle shift began within Catherine. The initial shock and adjustment phase was settling into a steadier, more accepted rhythm. She started a course of gentle physiotherapy aimed at rebuilding her core strength compromised by the abdominal surgery. These sessions were painful and frustrating, but she approached them with the discipline of an athlete. Her therapist became another trusted confidant, celebrating the small wins, holding a plank for 10 more seconds, walking up the stairs without getting winded. Catherine began to think about the future not as a return to a past identity, but as the construction of a new one. She discussed with William the possibility of using her experience when the time was right to advocate for others facing similar battles, perhaps in the realm of early diagnosis or supportive care for families. The illness was reshaping her perspective, sanding down some of the polished perfection of the princess and revealing the gritty, compassionate core of the woman. She was learning that strength was not just about enduring, but about adapting. That resilience was not about bouncing back to exactly who you were, but integrating the struggle into who you are becoming. The world still saw only the closed door of her withdrawal, but on the other side of that door, in the quiet heart of her family, a profound and quiet transformation was underway. The turning point, when it arrived, was not marked by a ringing bell or a final medical scan. It came on an unremarkable Tuesday in late July, as Catherine sat in the sun-dappled conservatory of Adelaide Cottage, a light blanket over her knees. She was reviewing a draft report for her Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood, and for the first time in months, she realized she had been engrossed for over an hour without a single intrusive thought about her health, without a wave of fatigue forcing her to stop. The clarity of mind, the sustained focus, felt like the return of an old friend. It was a quiet, internal signal that the balance was finally, tentatively shifting. The preventative chemotherapy cycles were nearing their planned conclusion, and her body, while still weary, was no longer in a state of constant shock. It was beginning to heal, not just from the illness, but from the cure itself. This internal shift prompted the first careful discussions about re-engagement. The talks, held with William, her private secretary, and her medical team, were governed by one non-negotiable principle. There would be no rushing. Any return to public life would be gradual, selective, and entirely on terms that prioritize her long-term health. The first step was not a grand appearance, but a private one with profound public resonance. Catherine asked to visit the oncology unit at the London clinic where she had received much of her treatment. She went not as a royal patron on an official visit, but as a fellow patient, albeit one with a unique platform. Dressed in simple, casual clothes, she spent an afternoon with the nursing staff and a few carefully chosen, long-term patients who had consented to meet her. There were no cameras, no press release. She spoke with them about the peculiar loneliness of a hospital chair, the strange taste the treatments left in your mouth, the fear that visits from loved ones can sometimes inadvertently stir. It was a conversation of shared vocabulary and unspoken understanding. For Catherine, it was a cathartic act of solidarity, a way to reclaim the narrative of her illness from the realm of abstract medical updates and connect it to human experience. For the staff and patients, it was an unforgettable moment of empathy from a woman who truly understood their battlefield. This private pilgrimage steeled her resolve. She had seen the need, felt the isolation, and it crystallized her desire to one day use her voice in this arena. Emboldened by this experience, a plan was hatched for a controlled, semi-public return. It would be a low-key, nature-based engagement reflecting her own therapeutic journey and her charitable interests. The chosen event was a short, private tour of a community woodland regeneration project in the Cotswolds, a cause with links to both her and William's environmental interests. The communication strategy was meticulous. A single, official photographer would be present, and one pooled camera crew. The images and footage released would be beautiful, controlled, and telling. The day was crisp and bright. Catherine arrived wearing sturdy walking boots, tailored trousers, and a simple sweater, a world away from Ascot finery. She walked slowly, deliberately, listening intently to the guides. The released photographs showed her kneeling to examine a sapling, her face in profile, showing concentration, but also a noticeable thinness. She looked peaceful, engaged, but undeniably changed. The message was clear. Here was a woman in recovery, active and dedicated, but not yet ready for the fray of a full-blown royal walkabout. The public and media response was overwhelmingly positive. The narrative began to pivot from "where is she" to "she's healing." The controlled transparency was working. This successful foray coincided with the family's traditional summer retreat to Balmoral. The vast, rugged landscapes of Scotland offered a different kind of medicine. Here, the privacy was absolute, the air clean and sharp. The rhythm of life slowed even further. There were picnics by lochs, afternoon teas with the king and queen, and long, slow walks where the only sounds were the crunch of gravel underfoot and the cry of distant birds. For the children, it was pure freedom. For Catherine, it was convalescence in its truest sense. She spent hours sitting outside with a sketchbook, not drawing, just being. The immense, timeless scale of the mountains put her own journey into perspective. Her worries did not vanish, but they seemed to shrink against the ancient, enduring landscape. It was here that she and William had some of their most significant conversations about the future. They talked about the lessons learned from this year of trial, the need for a more sustainable pace, the importance of guarding private family time as sacred, and the potential to leverage their experience to support causes related to health and well-being. William spoke of his own increased awareness of his family's fragility and how it had reshaped his views on his future role. The summer at Balmoral acted as a crucible, solidifying the changes that the illness had initiated within them as individuals and as a family unit. As the heather bloomed purple on the hills, Catherine felt a gathering strength, both physical and emotional. The quiet victory of the woodland visit, the restorative power of Balmoral, and the nearing end of her active treatment coalesced into a newfound steadiness. She began to tentatively plan a few select engagements for the autumn, all connected to her core passions of early childhood and the outdoors. The focus would be on substance over spectacle, on deep-dive projects rather than ribbon cuttings. The woman who was emerging from this ordeal was not simply the Princess of Wales returning to duty. She was someone who had stared into the abyss of her own mortality and had returned with a clarified vision. The polished perfection was now layered with a visible humanity, a grace born of vulnerability. The world was beginning to see not just a royal figure recovering, but a person transformed. The story was no longer about why she withdrew. It was becoming about what she learned in the quiet and how she would choose to move forward, carrying the weight of her experience not as a burden, but as a source of deeper connection and purpose. The autumn air in London carried a new crispness, a sense of turning pages. For Catherine, the season marked a deliberate and thoughtful reentry, a chapter written with careful pen rather than bold ink. The first fully public engagement was a masterclass in signaling. She chose to visit a hospice in Surrey that provided palliative and supportive care not just for patients, but for their entire families, including specialist support for children. The cause touched directly on the intersection of health and family life that her own experience had seared into her consciousness. She did not speak about her own illness publicly, but her presence in that environment spoke volumes. Dressed in a soft dove-gray suit, she moved through the sun-filled rooms, spending time with patients, talking with play therapists, and listening to stories of resilience and loss. Her empathy was palpable, a quiet, grounded connection that went beyond royal protocol. When an elderly gentleman, his voice thin but clear, told her, "It's the small kindnesses that get you through, isn't it, my dear?" She took his hand and simply replied, "Yes, it truly is." The moment, captured by the press pool, resonated widely. This was not the glamorous Duchess of Cambridge of a decade prior. This was a woman who now spoke the language of human fragility with an authentic accent. The public's embrace of this evolved Catherine was immediate and profound. Letters of support, which had never ceased, now took on a different tone. They included not just wishes for her health, but shared stories from people navigating their own or a loved one's illness. Her office was inundated with personal accounts, many mentioning how her dignified journey had given them strength. This feedback loop was powerful for Catherine. It validated her instinct that sharing her struggle, even in a limited way, could have a positive impact far greater than any number of perfectly staged public appearances. With William's steadfast support, she began to quietly direct her team to explore how these narratives could inform her future work. The idea of a long-term project focused on the holistic support systems around illness, particularly for parents and children, began to take concrete shape in discussions with experts and charity leaders. This period of re-engagement was also a time of private reckoning. The final rounds of preventative treatment were complete, and she entered a phase of monitoring, regular scans, and blood tests that would dictate the rhythm of the coming years. Each appointment carried the ghost of anxiety, a silent, shared tension between her and William in the days leading up to it. This anxiety, as many patients called it, was a new, unwelcome part of their vocabulary. They developed rituals around these dates, a quiet walk together the morning of, a favorite meal prepared for the evening after, regardless of the news. The waiting for results was an exercise in mental fortitude, a practice in living in the present moment, because the future was temporarily opaque. These cycles served as humbling reminders that her recovery was not a summit to be conquered, but a landscape to be navigated, with possible valleys still ahead. It fostered in her a profound appreciation for the clean days, the stretches of unremarkable wellness that were now gifts to be treasured. The family dynamic, too, had settled into a new pattern. The children, having adapted to the quieter household, now thrived with a mother who was increasingly present and engaged, if sometimes still needing to rest. Catherine made a conscious effort to be involved in the minutiae of their lives, helping with homework, planning weekend adventures, listening to their stories with undivided attention. The experience had stripped away non-essentials, focusing their family unit on the core of connection. William, witnessing this, became even more determined to modernize the monarchy's demands. He initiated conversations within the household about reducing overseas travel, clustering engagements to allow for longer periods at home, and leveraging technology more effectively to fulfill duties without constant physical presence. The illness had acted as a catalyst, accelerating his vision for a more sustainable, family-centric royal operation. As Christmas approached, a time of year she had always loved for its focus on family and tradition, Catherine felt a welling of gratitude unlike any before. The plans were modest, a quiet celebration at Sandringham with the king and queen, focusing on the children's joy. There was talk of a possible, brief public appearance on the walk to church, but the decision was left entirely to how she felt on the day. There was no pressure, internal or external. This, she realized, was perhaps the greatest gift of the entire harrowing journey, the unshakable permission to prioritize her well-being without guilt. The woman who had withdrawn from Royal Ascot under a cloud of global speculation was now stepping into the festive season with a hard-won peace. She had faced the vulnerability of her body and had found an unanticipated strength of spirit. The path ahead was not about erasing the experience, but about integrating it. The world might still comment on her health, but she now held the pen to her own story. It was a story that had expanded far beyond a single missed horse race, becoming a narrative of quiet courage, familial love, and a redefinition of strength that would forever color her role, making her not just a princess the people admired, but a woman with whom they could profoundly connect. The new year dawned not with a fanfare of resolutions, but with a deep, settled sense of continuity. The intense drama of diagnosis and treatment had receded, replaced by the steady, watchful rhythm of life after. Catherine's schedule, once a relentless parade of engagements, was now a carefully curated tapestry woven with threads of work, family, and essential rest. Her public appearances, while growing in frequency, remained intentional. She launched the first major initiative from her Center for Early Childhood that had been developed during her convalescence, a nationwide campaign promoting the vital role of community connection in supporting parents and caregivers. The language she used in her speech was telling. She spoke of isolation, of the strength found in shared experience, and of building supportive ecosystems. To the public, it was a passionate advocacy for early years. To those who had followed her journey closely, it was also a subtle reflection of her own learned truth that healing happens not in solitude, but within a network of care. The campaign was met with acclaim, noted for its evidence-based approach and its palpable authenticity. The long-anticipated Trooping the Color ceremony, the monarch's official birthday celebration, presented the next symbolic milestone. The decision for Catherine to attend was made only weeks in advance, following a positive consultation with her medical team. On the day, as she stepped onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace beside William and their children, the crowd's roar seemed to swell with a special warmth. She looked radiant in an elegant cream coat and hat, her smile easy and genuine. The world's press captured the moment, focusing on the return to normalcy. But those who looked closer saw the subtle differences. The slight, protective way William's hand rested at the small of her back, the conscious pace of her wave, the serene composure that seemed less like a performance and more like a hard-earned inner state. She did not join the lengthy carriage procession back to the palace, a detail noted and respected. It was a powerful statement in itself. She was back, but on her own terms, respecting the new boundaries her body required. This balance was tested and affirmed during a minor national crisis, a devastating flood in a northern region of England. William traveled immediately to visit affected communities. Catherine, watching the news from home, felt a familiar pull to be there to offer comfort. The old instinct, the drive to duty, surged. But she also felt the faint, familiar whisper of fatigue from a busy week. After a talk with William and her private secretary, a different solution was found. The next day, from her desk at Adelaide Cottage, she held a video call with a group of emergency responders and volunteers, thanking them personally for their tireless work. She then made a surprise call to a community center acting as a shelter, speaking with displaced families, particularly focusing on the children, asking what toys they missed most. Within hours, a delivery of toys and books, organized discreetly through one of her patronages, arrived at the center. It was action without the physical toll, impact without the pageantry. It represented a mature evolution in her role, leveraging influence and empathy in a sustainable way. Privately, the experience continued to reverberate through their marriage. William and Catherine's relationship had been forged in the white-hot glare of public scrutiny, but it had been tempered and strengthened in the quiet, fearful rooms of illness. They had seen each other at their most vulnerable and had not looked away. This forged a bond of unparalleled intimacy and trust. They began to consciously carve out micro-moments for their partnership. A walk after the children were in bed, a coffee together first thing in the morning before the day's demands intruded. They discussed the future with a renewed sense of partnership, viewing their roles not just as duties to be performed, but as a shared life's work to be nurtured. William became more vocal in his support for causes related to mental health and caregiver support, his perspective undeniably deepened by walking alongside his wife. Catherine's advocacy gained a new, unshakable gravity. When she spoke of the importance of early childhood development, it was now layered with the unspoken understanding of a mother who had fought fiercely to be present for her own children's formative years. The story that began with a withdrawal from a royal horse race had, over the months, unfolded into something far richer and more universal. Catherine's health update was no longer a mystery to be explained, but a lived experience that had reshaped a woman, a family, and the public's perception of them. She had shown that courage could look like quiet retreat just as much as stoic appearance. That strength was in listening to one's body as much as pushing through. That being royal did not make one immune to the most human of trials. Her journey offered a quiet antidote to a world obsessed with relentless productivity and curated perfection. It was a story of grace under profound pressure, of love as a practical force, and of finding a new, authentic voice on the other side of suffering. The Princess of Wales had not simply returned to the fold. She had evolved, carrying with her the wisdom of the shadows, ready to serve with a compassion that was deeper, a perspective that was clearer, and a humanity that had been profoundly and forever expanded. The Ascot stand would see her again one day, perhaps, but she would arrive there as a different woman, one who knew the value of the view from the quiet garden just as much as the view from the royal box.